Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, a dream Marvel crossover, a surprisingly good movie game, and did you find the guy? Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is November 18th, 1992. Swinging their way onto the SNES this week in 1992 with a pronounced snicket was Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge.
Tired of the same old fun and games? Welcome Spider-Man X-Men to the video game ride of your lives.
Wolverine, Spider-Man, Gambit, Cyclops.
Now on Genesis, the ultimate video game team. Are we having fun yet?
Spider-Man and the X-Men stars a playable Spider-Man and 4 X-Men: Cyclops, Storm, Wolverine, and Gambit. Each plays differently with their own unique powers. Spider-Man's web swinging, Cyclops' optic blasts, Wolverine's claws and healing, Gambit's cards, and Storm's, swimming. The lesser-known villain Arcade has captured them all into his series of death traps, each designed for that hero. There's plenty of platforming, robot destruction, and a host of familiar Marvel villains showing up like Shocker, Sentinels, and the Juggernaut. The game is also notoriously difficult. There's lots of instant death traps for several of the stages, brutal enemy placement, and not many health power-ups to go around. You have to pass 2 stages for every character, plus one last final level, complete with boss fights, all on 2 lives, shared amongst all of them, and no continues. It's also honestly fun at times. All the characters play uniquely, and that's genuinely enjoyable. I've already done an entire separate video on this game and my grievances with it, so feel free to give that another watch. Now, in the 90s, Spider-Man and the X-Men were a really big deal, as both had an incredibly successful animated series. Contrary to popular belief, however, this game was not created as a response to those successful cartoons. X-Men the Animated Series premiered on Fox Kids on October 31st, 1992, and the Spider-Man animated series would not debut until November of 1994. The video game was just a separate idea someone had, though some tie-in comics were created as a means to help promote the video game. The game would eventually get ported to the Sega Genesis in 1993 and to the Game Boy and the Game Gear in 1994. Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge was developed by Acclaim Entertainment's Software Creations and published by LJN. Yes, that LJN. The game was wrought with issues during development, according to Richard Kay of Software Creations, stating that Spider-Man and X-Men started going horribly wrong, and Acclaim were screaming at us and threatening litigation, and we ended up with 3 teams on this one game. The game was released to the public essentially unfinished, knowingly rough around the edges, and often unfair. This didn't go unnoticed by reviewers at the time either. Electronic Gaming Monthly issue 41 gave it mostly favorable reviews, but also said things like, "There's not enough enemies and that the music isn't very good." Excuse me? The music was done by Greg and Tim Fallon and is easily the best part of the entire game for how impressively awesome it is. Reviews used to make no sense at the time. Speaking of licensed games that are way better than they ever should be, released this week in 1992, was Home Alone for the Sega Genesis. Home Alone is based on the hit film from 1990 starring Macaulay Culkin. In it, a young boy's family travels for Christmas and accidentally leaves Kevin behind in his massive upper-class family home. 2 bandits arrive to steal from the house as much as possible, but not before Kevin can set up a series of toy-based traps for hijinks, slapstick comedy, and blunt force trauma. Home Alone, the video game for the Genesis, follows the plot pretty close. You play as Kevin traveling around the neighborhood using his fan-powered sled from the movie. Instead of just one home to defend, there are several. You can freely explore and enter any of the houses, collecting weapons and objects to set up traps for the wet bandits. Once the bandits experience enough pain, they'll leave for a brief while, giving you more time to set more traps. Surprisingly innovative for the time is being able to find all kinds of mundane household objects and combine them into new weapons and traps to use. The Home Alone game had weapon crafting decades before it became en vogue for video games circa 2010. A Home Alone video game had already been made by this point for the NES, SNES, Game Boy, and MS-DOS in 1991. However, those games were developed by Imagineering Inc., and the NES version was developed by Bethesda. Yes, that Bethesda. The Sega Genesis and European exclusive Master System versions were developed by Sega of America themselves. This is around the time when Sega was more committed than ever to beat Nintendo. One of their means of doing so was to take on development of third-party games directly to make sure their version was the best, such as the case with Home Alone, which they succeeded. It is the best version of the Home Alone video game and is pretty fun. For like an hour, then it's pretty repetitive, but this is more fun to have than any of the other versions. Diving deep into the obscure, released this week in 1992, was Forgotten Worlds for the TurboCD. Forgotten Worlds is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up from Capcom. You play as unknown soldiers floating around and blasting everything that comes your way, with each soldier having a different weapon. Blue guy has a long-range machine gun, and red guy has a short-range wide shot. You can rotate to shoot in a whopping 16 directions for precision, collect money from defeated enemies, and power up in shops found throughout the stages. Forgotten Worlds was originally an arcade game from Capcom in 1988, notably the very first one to use their CPS-1 arcade board that would later go on to power hits like Final Fight and Street Fighter II. Forgotten Worlds was ported to numerous home PC systems and the Sega Genesis and Master System in 1990. The TurboCD version would be the latest, most up-to-date port of the game, taking full advantage of the CD format. This meant arcade-quality graphics, CD-quality music, and hilarious voiceovers for the cutscenes.
Did you find the guy? I'll finish you today for sure.
The Japanese version of the game was also released with a special 3-button controller for the TurboGrafx, allowing for 1 button to rotate left, 1 to rotate right, and 1 to shoot. That controller never left Japan, which meant that the Western release had to make do with just 2 buttons. Also worse, the TurboGrafx-CD version of Forgotten Worlds does not have 2-player co-op at all. Forgotten Worlds coming to the TurboCD was seen as a big enough deal that gaming magazine Turbo Force, their answer to Nintendo Power, had a 2-page spread covering that game alone. When each issue is only 30 pages long, that's a lot of real estate for one game. While you may not have heard of Forgotten Worlds before, you may recognize the characters. Suddenly, just now, you realize where the unknown soldier assist character from Marvel vs. Capcom 1 comes from. And plenty of other games released this week, and with all of those, here's Editor Dylan.
The other games released this week include Road Riot 4-Wheel Drive for the SNES. I'm not a big racing fan, so I didn't expect much going in. But once I found out I could shoot the racers in front of me, it was a blast. If you've got an hour to kill, it's good cheap fun. The Game Gear had Wimbledon Tennis, which is so extraordinarily average it's actually kind of impressive. Can we just get a sports game that isn't afraid to try something different or unique? Well, according to the box art of our final game, these chubby-cheeked children provide hot sports action for the NES. And I already hate it. But as they say, never judge a game by its cover. That's how Panic Restaurant got overlooked. So let's see if Crash N the Boys, not spelled with a Z, Street Challenge, is a sports game that even attempts something original. Dude, it's River City Sports! You got an engaging plot complete with cutscenes, expressive animations, and dialogue, awesome music, and upbeat 8-bit renditions of classical songs, diverse and engaging gameplay with fun spins on each event, of which some are freaking brutal, man. Sprint and break through obstacles, of which you could then chuck them at your opponent. Fling deadly chain chomps across a golf course. Parkour off skyscrapers with poles, tight ropes, and unicycles. Swimming. You swim. With underwater combat, piranhas, and literally drowning a man? It's got the hypest fighting mode on the NES. Look at some of these moves. Oh, that's got a sting. Well, I hope he's insured. Oh, he's got a yeah! If you need help, you could visit shops to buy upgrades for yourself, like a spin kick or a spaz roll. Buy traps and debuffs for your enemies like thumbtacks or This store's giving out spool jobs for $2? I mean, I don't even know what that is, but hey, I'll try anything once. I could go on. You have names like Cheese and Noise who are part of the boys. But we have a total of 6 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1992. I can't believe the amount of effort put into Crash and the Boys, and lack of effort into the box art. But this is the best sports game of the year, if not the entire NES catalog. And plus, it's not made by Taito, so it doesn't doesn't cost a kidney. Speaking of cost, let's go back to Jared in the Collector's Corner.
Much appreciated, Dylan. In the Collector's Corner, Spider-Man and the X-Men's value is less than the quarters I've dropped at an arcade. The card alone is barely over $10, and a complete copy is less than $50. Home Alone for Sega, despite easily being the best version, isn't much either. You can find the game for just under $15, and a full copy is only $36. Forgotten Worlds is this week's biggest value gainer. The game disc alone is worth $110, and a complete version is worth $175. And that's it for today. Next week, a landmark moment in video gaming history as a blue streak speeds by. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much. If for some reason you want to see a grown-ass man lose his mind playing Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge, I did a full playthrough of it over on my secondary channel, Pro Jared Plays. I'll put a link in the description for you to check out.